Hello everyone, welcome to the third edition of our daily scientific governance and risk meeting. We'll be having these calls until the community decides that we don't need them anymore, until the market improves or one or the other, or some combination of those two things occur. My name is Richard Brown. I am the head of community development at MakerDAO and also the governance facilitator. We had a lot of deeply technical and important discussions yesterday. There's a lot to go over, and we're going to hopefully zoom in on 2 or 3 major issues today with one, I think, cool presentation put in the mix for variety. And then we'll hopefully have more time for a general Q&A at the end of the call, because yesterday was a 2-hour call and there was still lots to talk about. But, the general ideas that I want people to internalize from yesterday's call and the day before, and well, if you're a new viewer in these calls since the very beginning, is that it's very important for us to surface ideas, make sure that signals are being heard, and have that spur activity in the forums so we can get proposals written in, so we can get governance happening, and then we can get votes, and then we can do deploys. And so the glorious cycle of open life for open governance needs to get started here, and then it continues in the forum and ends up in the portal. And so let's make sure that concerns are heard and ideas are raised and brains are stormed, and then all of that information is recorded to the forums so we can continue the momentum. And we have some really good examples of that activity from yesterday, which is going to inform some of the content for today. So we have a forum post. Actually, Aaron, I might lean on you a bit today. I kind of threatened / volunteered / asked you whether you'd be willing to have a chat with us today. I'm not sure I got a review or a response, but either way, we can do it or you can do it. Aaron has put some great information in the forums for us. We're going to review that thread. There's so the threads we're going to look at are flop debt auction parameter adjustments, which ties into another larger theme. We have to be expedient and agile, and those are 2 of the nicest ways I'm going to describe the events of the last week. And that means that actions need to be taken to stabilize and shore up the system and to protect users, and ultimately to help protect DeFi. And so decisions have to be made, but those decisions aren't written in stone. They're immutable, but they can be altered in the future. And so over the course of the next weeks, we need to take corrective action, but we also need to take the opportunity to look back and fix and tweak and improve the things that we did. And that's what we're doing right now. So we're going to talk about flop debt auction parameters and whether those need some care and attention. We are going to raise a specter from the past, and we're going to talk about the shutdown of single collateral DAI and what that implies, whether there's an appetite for that kind of thing, and some of the larger issues that are surrounding that, like what do we do about outstanding fees in that world. And we're also going to talk about circuit breakers. I mentioned that yesterday, that this is going to be, the community is, the ecosystem is waking up to some realities. And there's been a lot of armchair economics happening in the ecosystem, and it's just what happens. When times are frothy, the hot takes come fast and furious, and it's easy to criticize from 10,000 feet, or from the cheap seats. It's far harder to criticize when you're actually doing the work like we are in this group. And so we need to make sure that we stay ahead of a bunch of emerging trends. But one of those emerging trends is going to be the circuit breakers and how those fit into the ecosystem that we all have built our businesses and our, well, I shouldn't say lives, that might be too dramatic, but the world that we live in right now. And that's going to encapsulate things, sort of like circuit breakers, because we've created an ecosystem that is adversarial by nature, and that adversarial ecosystem is designed to evolve checks and balances and immunities and protections for itself in the absence of a 10,000 page rule book that we're all forced to follow. And one of those checks and balances is going to be circuit breakers. And we'll find that in the DeFi space in general as more and more people begin to implement these things. We also have we'll have a presentation from, Adrian, did we confirm that we're good? I believe we did. I might be putting him on the spot right now, but we'll have a brief demo of some DAI tool, some auction tools that are in the works, which I'm looking forward to. Okay, at that point, Cyrus, obviously I didn't get enough sleep and I'm beginning to ramble, so I'm going to hand it off to you to start walking us through the agenda.
Sure. Maybe we can start going through some of the interesting forum threads that that popped up last night. So there was one on the flop auction parameters. Long for Wisdom or the other Rich who wrote the post. Do either of you guys want to walk through that thread a little bit, maybe? Sorry to put either of you on the spot.
Yeah, I can walk through it.
Yeah, go for it.
Right, so this is kind of in response to the conversation we had yesterday that Cyrus laid out and kind of alerted us to the fact that like we have these scheduled debt auctions that are coming up, fought debt auctions, and they may fail given the price that the kind of parameters have all these auctions starting at. So this has all the background information on like the specific parameters that affect how these auctions would run. And it's important to think about like what this post addressed. It addresses, you know, if we have the auction at the scheduled time, you know, what happens if we, for some reason, have the quote unquote market price for MKR to DAI be less than the starting bid, and kind of like what are the fallback measures or what would happen and like what we could do to address them by adjusting these parameters ahead of time. What this doesn't address is, you know, why are we having these auctions? Should people have their collateral saved and all those things? And, you know, some people may want to discuss that, but this is strictly, you know, assuming the auction happens, what can we do to mitigate any risks of any failed auctions? So as we think about the poll, there's kind of like 5 options. It ended up being a little bit more than needed to be, but like if you think about the first option of like, we do nothing, we let them run as is, we, you know, don't change the parameters. That's like one end of the spectrum. And then there was a suggestion from a community member to basically delay it until we get the right kind of volatility or the right type of DAI peg that we were looking for. And that could mean that maybe we delay the auctions by a couple of days, maybe a week, maybe indefinitely. So that's the other end of the spectrum. And then the 3 options that I kind of proposed and we discussed yesterday was, 1, how do we change the lot size? So how do we change the dump parameter? Second is, how do we change kind of the length of the auction, which would be the tau? And third is, what do we change? How do we change the like discount factor from one failed action to another one being reinitialized, which is the padding? I won't go into the technical details too much, but just like at a very high level, if we increase the lot size, that means the starting price will just go down as a matter of math. So instead of being 200, you know, we could bring it down to a certain number based on how much the lot size increases. So we can aim and target 175, 150, whatever. If we decrease the flip, what it essentially says we could have more participants in auctions, because once they close out one, they would then be able to, you know, quickly join another. And again, I don't have like the technical auction details on like how that dynamic works out, but that's the general kind of general rationale. And then the third is, what if we increase the size of the discount factor so the minimum bid would drop faster in between failed auctions? So there's more information on the forum post, but that's a very like high level overview of what we talked about yesterday. And thanks Cyrus and Long for kind of helping me put this together. I'll let you guys add anything if you want.
Can I add an idea? I think, as we can see from spot prices right now, they're all hovering around $200. So my argument would be to keep it at $200 for the dump, because it seems like market prices are kind of following the auction prices right now.
I agree. I think on Bitfinex it's trading at 214, and I think that's because there's a premium on the price of DAI. So it's effectively 200 DAI per maker.
Yeah, so essentially whatever we set the dump to is we're pretty much, you know, guaranteeing the market price right now, and everyone's hedging their bets on that.
Guaranteeing is a strong word.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite that that cut and dried, right? It might be following the auction price, or it might be a coincidence. Like, it appears to be correlated. We don't know there's like causation in there, right?
I'd say there's definitely some trading psychology involved in all this, but it's not a one-to-one correlation in my mind.
I think, I guess like a risk that I've been thinking a lot about the past couple of days has been how people are going to turn over the maker token. So I think individuals participating in the auction are going to be bidding DAI for MKR. And then a lot of these individuals are going to be taking MKR and selling it on secondary markets for DAI. That way they can continue to participate in the auction. And I looked at the liquidity across the books, and it looks like there's maybe on average like 200K US dollar equivalent worth of MKR sitting on books across exchanges listed on CoinMarketCap. So I think the problem is that the secondary markets don't have the liquidity to support or the demand to support people participating in the auctions, effectively like cycling their maker. And that means that the price could collapse in the secondary markets, and then people will stop participating in the auctions.
Well, I think more likely, and I think this argument was brought up yesterday, is that because of the lack of liquidity on secondary exchanges, you're more likely to see bidders who are willing to take a somewhat more long-term position in MKR. And therefore it would kind of make the market price signal to be less important overall. Because if you're trying to, you're gonna have a tough time if you're trying to arbitrage the auction against the secondaries. So I think rather than seeing, and because of the minimum bid price, you can't exactly price in a discount to the market price either. So in some ways, I think that would be good for the community, because if we do see bids tomorrow, then it will be from somewhat more long-term committed investors. And then if we don't, because keepers are basically signaling that they require the ability to arbitrage against secondaries, then first off, we wouldn't know how high that discount would have to be. And yeah, we'd have to end up kind of waiting for a few cycles of the auction reinitializations. Yes,
so I guess in that case, so I think that's a really good point. I hadn't considered that people might just be buying and not looking to arbitrage the auctions. In the case that people are trying to arbitrage the auctions, is that to say sort of like the majority of people are arbitraging auctions? Is that to say that sort of the worst case is maybe there's going to be a bunch of MKR token that's bought up front, and then as the liquidity on secondary markets dries up, everybody participating in the auctions either is out of funds because they bought it for the long term and they're not arbitraging, or the arbitragers just aren't buying because they're waiting for the price to drop. We'll see some delay, and then the price will drop significantly, and they'll just start arbitraging it on the secondary markets at a lower price. And do we just want that to happen more efficiently? Like, would it be better if the auctions were more efficient in terms of like realizing the real price of MKR token quicker?
I'll speak to kind of what was the stated goal as someone who's not like trying to predict where the market's going to be and looking for arbitrage opportunities. It just seems to me like if you can avoid kind of failed auctions and like, having bad debt sit in a queue for a while, then this doesn't necessarily like make a value judgment on where the price will be. It just kind of, for lack of a better term, would give some wiggle room. So like these auctions can happen and have more participants. So I don't know what the worst case scenario is, but if we do change parameters and the price, for some reason stabilizes through one of the many measures that happens, and there isn't that much volatility, and the price happens to be at 200 where we were coincidentally the arbitrary value kind of came out to be, that's great, and the auctions will perform just fine. So I don't know what necessarily like we need to solve for, but I think this solves for how do we like instill, or how do we kind of fortify the health of auctions without having to speculate too much on what's going on with the peg and like what's affecting it, because there's a lot, and I don't know if anyone here wants to be bold and say they know exactly, but this is more just to kind of fortify the auctions to try and limit the failing of them.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Might be trying to like optimize for the wrong things here then, to think about this more. Thank you.
Just going to make a small point about secondary markets as well. Despite the big push to get lots of people involved in the keeper auctions, there's a good chance there's a subset of people that either can't participate because of technical ability or because of capital requirements, and might be waiting to buy Maker on secondary markets at a depressed price due to the auctions. It's possible we'll see more liquidity come into like the secondaries as the auctions go on. Not guaranteed, obviously, but possible.
I would also just add that in the original notes, we mentioned the Maker backstop syndicate, which, there's another measure of kind of safety in there. I'm not sure if it got into the post, but like there are kind of like redundant ways to make sure that, this all gets accounted for, but it's just a matter of, how do we kind of nip it in the butt right away so it doesn't drag on for a long period of time. But yeah, I think the secondary markets will be there. I think the backstop syndicate will also be there.
Does anybody know if the backstop syndicate actually has like a technical solution for doing the whole pooling and participating thing yet? Because I haven't been following too closely.
They have a REPA, which has significant levels of activity in it. They've been in contact with our developers, so I'm reasonably sure.
Nice contract.
Well, we have people in
Yeah.
the call that, Peter, do you want to talk about this briefly? No, Mike. All right. Is there anybody from the syndicate that can give us some insight into what they've been up to? So I'm curious.
I can talk about it. This is Scott Bigelow. I'm FF on the call here. So what was the question? So yeah, people pool in prior to the first auction starting.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I'm trying to get a sense of where you guys are technically, and are you ready to deploy? Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
but it's ready to deploy. It should be deployed today. Kind of just wrapping up some ends. I don't know where the front end is. I just know where the contracts are. Those are in good shape. I mean, I think probably one of the largest hurdles is going to be, marketing it and acquiring enough liquidity, because, like I said, you can't pile in after the first auction has started, just to be fair about the way that the rewards are distributed. So it's going to be kind of a race to get that liquidity in there.
Well, this is interesting. We have a full agenda, but I would dearly love to hear about this actually. So would you guys be willing to come on tomorrow and give us like a 5 to 10 minute explanation of what you have going on and how it works?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to have a little presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow is going to be after the flops and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
It's like 24 hours from now, right?
Yeah, I think a little less based on what people have said previously.
All right. Well, Cyrus, what do you think? Can we try to squeeze that in today towards the end of the call?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. Okay, cool. So congratulations. You have about 35 minutes to come up with a presentation for us. So, I expect slides and animations. All right. Cyrus, I also want to point out to you that Adrian is here to give us a demo as well that might be relevant to this conversation. So maybe once we're done talking about flops, we can hand it off to him too.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's worth wrapping up this flop auction parameter discussion, because as it currently stands, there's kind of no plan, right? Everything is going to stay as is based on based on the forum poll results from last night. I don't personally have strong opinions one way or another, but I mean, there seems to be a lot of, I mean, this isn't such a clear-cut issue. So if the community wants certain actions to be taken, I think the time window on speaking up or getting voices heard is quickly running out, because there are some technical constraints towards, there's some technical risks to changing anything so late in the cycle. My primary, actually, I think maybe my only concern in all of this is anything to do with Keeper software being needed to be changed last minute due to changing auction dynamics.
Yeah, that feels like a non-starter to me. Okay. Oh yeah, but actually, before we move on to, that's what I was going to say. I just want to give a special thank you to other Rich for getting that forum thread together and coordinating all of that is very much appreciated. We're obviously all hands on deck. The foundation and many people in the community have been working nonstop, which feels like days now, but according to the calendar, it's been almost 6 straight days of furious levels of activity. And so I really appreciate Rich and Aaron coming to our rescue and getting those forum threads underway. And Long for Wisdom as usual, but I don't want to praise him too much because I'll give him a swollen head. He's been praised too much already. All right. Adrian, do you want to give us a little presentation?
Talking to me?
Sure, yeah.
Sure. I would like to share my screen and take the next 5 minutes just to show the work the team has been doing on the flop auctions UI. So if you guys can just give me 1 second. Yeah. So before I start, like quite an important disclaimer. This UI is very much a work in progress. We started it, everyone can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Cool. We started this work late last week and have been working through the weekend to get it done by tomorrow. So let's consider any inconsistencies in text, in terminology, in UIs. Basically, we are trying to get this done before tomorrow. So there are a few verifications still to be done. I'm assuming the audience of this call already knows how the auction mechanisms work. So I'm not gonna cover that in a lot of detail. I can show you basically what we are thinking with regards to the user experience. Basically, the user comes in with a wallet with DAI. They will have to approve a few verification transactions before starting. Let me just switch to a clean account and you can see that. Like so. Yeah, as you can see, I already did 1 of the 3. But basically, every user will first have to approve these transactions. They will then have a UI state where they are able to bid on auctions. The team is working right now on doing a few sorting mechanisms and ways to filter by auction ID, so you can easily find an auction you're looking for. We are working hard on getting the most relevant bits of data from the auction events displayed on the screen. Maybe I can find a auction that has some data. Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, you can inspect when the auction started, the bids that the auction has received, and this auction in particular has already ended and deal has already been called. So you can also see that here. As you can see, this auction, the bid values, since we are testing on Kovan, they are very much not the real values we can expect tomorrow. So this auction is bidding, this auction resulted in 0.9 MKR for one die. Again, this is Kovan, so just consider these numbers. And this was the price of MKR denominated in die. We need to fix this denomination here to make that clearer. For most users, the default flow will be to, like I said, deposit some die into the VAT. That would probably be in 50,000 increments because that's the bid size. User will enable the debt auctions, and then user will find the auction that they want to bid in. They will either press this bid now button on the instant bid, which will take the lot size. It would take the bag value, which I believe is 3% or 5%. The code does the calculation for you, and you automatically place a bid with the right amount. Custom bid, you can actually go here and input any value that you'd like. This should actually work. And of course, we're gonna have a better user experience around transactions and whatnot, but I might be able to show you the result. Oh, no, that failed. Sorry, my bad. Demo. But basically, this UI will be working tomorrow. That aside, there isn't much more to be shown here. Whenever the auction ends, the MKR should go directly to your account. There will be a UI to call deal, but deal might already be called. We are figuring out those details right now. Tomorrow, I plan on giving like a better demo of the finished UI and show you the URL that we'll have available for that. Yeah, for now, there's a bit of a sneak preview of what we will have available coming tomorrow. If anyone has any feedback, any ideas of how this can be improved, feel free to send it my way. I'll post on any of the stakeholders on this call, foundation stakeholders, I mean, and we'll try to include it for tomorrow. And that's pretty much it.
That's great. Thanks for that. Where would they reach out? The Keepers channel? Is that a good spot in our chat?
Yeah, let's use the Keepers channel. I think that's a good spot for now.
Okay, cool. Does anybody have any questions related to the UI that they want to talk about?
Is there an expected domain that's going to be hosted at?
It will likely be hosted on auctions.makerdao.com, but let's wait around until we announce that officially.
Cool, thanks.
There's a good question from Hans, I think. And I had the same question when I was looking at this. How is, I'm not sure, I can't envision how much activity is going to be flying through that thing when the auctions start. Is it going to be able to handle a significant number of auctions at once?
Yes, we expect it to be able to handle all the flop auctions fine for this week. That means 100 plus simultaneous auctions. We are working hard to optimize those queries. We might improve the UX in the process, but yes, we are confident about at least the flop auctions. At a later stage, sorry, Rich, go ahead.
Well, no, if you're going to say something important, let's let you go ahead.
No, at a later stage, we might support flip auctions. That's not a priority for this week. And by then, we will have to be more concerned about the API performance, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Leighton had another good question too, which I was too embarrassed to ask for myself. Can we get maybe a glossary function or maybe some plain English for some of the internal parameter names? Is it on the roadmap?
That is a great comment. It was, and it should be for tomorrow. Yes.
I know you guys think in 4-letter words, but for the rest of us, it takes a second or two to figure out what those things mean. Any more questions about the thing?
Lane also asked if we could have a tutorial call before the auction start tomorrow morning. Like, would it be possible to do like a run through on Kovan of what of maybe like the modern auction would have like using that UI before the actual things start?
What I had in mind was to do that walkthrough during this call tomorrow. If the community wants to do it before the auction starts, I'm happy to put something together by then.
I mean, no auctions are ending before the call tomorrow. Is that correct? So maybe that's fine. What does everyone think?
Yeah, that is correct, actually. So there isn't really a rush to get it out before tomorrow's governance call.
You could tutorial it on like a live auction then.
Yeah, well, let's possibly figure out something in the middle. So let's join the Keepers channel and finish up the rest of the coordination there. But as Leighton also pointed out, Leighton, you have a microphone, don't you? You could be asking your own questions. You want to go ahead?
Oh, no, so I think they were all answered. Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't think if I looked at that and the auction was live, I would just know how to use it right away. So it'd be good to have.
I wouldn't either, so I'm glad that you said that first. So let's have this, maybe just a screencast would be good, or some kind of documentation or a walkthrough that we can throw up on YouTube for people to follow along with. Would be great.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I'm going to hand it back to you, Cyrus.
Okay, cool. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about, so yesterday we started talking about these new tools that governance has added over the past several days, namely the liquidation freeze or circuit breaker, and additionally USDC as collateral. While we have these tools in our arsenal now, there hasn't really been a lot of discussion on when or how to use them. So I'm going to do a little presentation on that. Apologies in advance. This is going to be somewhat of a text-heavy presentation, unfortunately, but we'll do our best. Okay, so 3 major changes to Maker over the past week. The first was the increase to the minimum bid duration from 10 minutes to 6 hours. The second was this circuit breaker, and the third was the addition of USDC as collateral. And there are 2 main issues from Black Thursday that I want to highlight over and over again. These are network congestion and keeper liquidity. And both are incredibly significant, but they are also somewhat distinct from each other. The change to the bid duration was primarily to alleviate congestion issues, people having difficulty syncing nodes, having issues with the mempool or sending transactions out, high gas prices, not having your keepers properly configured. All of those issues were obviously difficult to fix on the spot, and having more than 10 minutes is obviously a huge benefit to trying to actually submit bids for the auctions. However, there is the other issue is that even if your node and connectivity issues are totally fine, you still need DAI to bid on these auctions, and there is really a scarce amount. There isn't really a lot of good DAI liquidity in the markets. This is made worse by the fact that the auctions, they come at you fast. They run concurrently. When a certain price point is liquidated, there's a huge surge of auctions that all get triggered at once. And there's a huge issue in that there's no, or previously there was no good way to space them out or rate limit them. I think the reality is that, well, liquidations I think are tough in any setting, even a centralized setting. And we saw some examples of that coincidentally last Thursday as well. But I think you lose a significant amount of flexibility with blockchains and doing these in a crypto setting. So today we're primarily going to talk about this secondary keeper liquidity issue. Kind of the network stuff we can talk about maybe some other time. So let's start out with a very simple example. These are just generally made up numbers. Assume keepers in total have 10 million DAI at their disposal. Now assume that at a price of 80, we have roughly $15 million of collateral to be liquidated. Given that the collateralization ratio is 150%, to protect Maker from system losses, you would need 10 million, or 2/3 of that collateral amount. Keepers come in, they have exactly 10 million, they bid on all the auctions, and then 6 hours later, the keepers receive ETH as proceeds from the auction, and then several hours later, they can convert that back into DAI. That last step is typically taking that ETH and maybe sending it to a centralized exchange, such as Coinbase, selling it for DAI, and then withdrawing the DAI. Sometimes, I mean, it might be easy to assume that you can just cycle it through Uniswap, but that is not always feasible given network congestion and other issues. For whatever reason, I think it's safe to assume that it would take a couple hours for keepers to convert back into DAI. So we're looking at maybe a 6 to 8 hour turnaround time. Additionally, this 2/3 number is obviously not ideal for vault owners, but that's also that's kind of a separate issue that just needs to be addressed with even better and better DAI liquidity. So now let's assume that after ETH has hit 80 and that 6 to 8 hour cycle has finished, keepers have received all of their DAI back, and then ETH price hits 75 and we have another $15 million of collateral is liquidated. Everything is fine again, right? Keepers have sufficient liquidity and the auction will be another success. Now, the big issue here, which I'm sure many of you know, is that during the middle of that first auction, the price now drops to $75. And we now have another $15 million of collateral to be liquidated. Keepers currently have all of their DAI tied up in the first auction that they were bidding on for the $80 lots. And they don't have any more DAI in their hands, right? And this is unfortunate because, as we just saw in the previous example, if they had time to get their DAI back, then they would, right? It's not really an exchange issue. They just their DAI is tied up in the previous auction. And if this situation occurs, then there will be no liquidity to bid on the auctions at 75, and the zero bids will win again. So we call this problem recycling DAI, which is this this lag in between, or which is this idea where keepers try to take their auction proceeds, sell it for DAI, and start over. And with concurrent auctions, keepers just simply don't have, they just don't, it's not possible for them to recycle their DAI fast enough because it's locked up. This is, right, even if keepers could otherwise handle the auction size, it doesn't matter. Even if the exchanges can handle liquidity, that's kind of irrelevant. doesn't matter if Coinbase can handle 50 or 100 million of liquidations. And also critically, the bid duration here is also completely irrelevant. If the bid duration was 24 hours or 3 days, as long as keeper liquidity is tied up in a previous auction, they cannot use it for any subsequent auctions. So the solution here is some sort of rate limiter, some way to space out the auctions so that they run sequentially instead of concurrently. This is really kind of a long-term problem. It's going to require, but I'm just kind of hypothesizing a kind of a restructuring of the auction format entirely in the long run. So for now, the best we can do is short-term solutions, short-term band-aids. And that's essentially what the liquidation freeze or the circuit breaker is designed to do. So when that second set of auctions at $75 is going to trigger, keepers can and should send some sort of signal to the community to pass an executive vote to trigger that circuit breaker. If this occurs, then the second set of liquidations will be paused. And then the community can wait for keepers to recycle their proceeds from the first auction back into DAI, and then unfreeze liquidations so that keepers can then successfully bid on the second set. So why 1 hour? That 1 hour is due to the OSM. So you have 1 hour advance notice that the liquidations at 75 are going to be triggered, and the community would need to put a stop to that prior to that expiration. As a reminder, the liquidation freeze is structured so it sits outside of the GSM. So the GSM of 4 hours does not impact this. Additionally, there is, of course, price volatility in freezing liquidations to the protocol. But the alternative is the severe liquidity shortage, which would almost certainly result in poorer prices received for the auctions. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Does everyone understand how the circuit breaker pauses liquidations to allow keepers a chance and the necessary time to recycle their DAI so that they can bid on the subsequent set of auctions? Cool. Okay, so this was kind of the first tool, and the second tool was the USDC edition. So with USDC now available in MCD, we can make some sort of assumption that the total set of keeper liquidity is now 20 million DAI instead of 10 million. With this increased base pool of DAI, they can now handle significantly larger liquidation amounts. And therefore, in some situations, it may make the circuit breaker unnecessary. So in the previous example, because the circuit breaker would no longer be necessary because just from the get-go, the keepers have more DAI at their disposal. So this was kind of one of the benefits of adding USDC as a collateral type. Now there are cases where we might need both. So if there, and this is just kind of a slight alteration, slight variation of the previous examples, but if you have just an enormous amount of collateral to be liquidated, the increased liquidity from USDC may not be enough. So you may have to rely on the circuit breakers again. So by now we can already see things are going to kind of operate on a case-by-case basis. The risk community is going to have to be fairly vigilant with respect to liquidations and the status of keeper liquidity and managing the OSM price. But unfortunately, that's just the short-term reality we live in right now. And then this, just to be clear, this also isn't a foolproof solution. There is a certain amount of collateral to be liquidated that keepers simply cannot handle, even with the available USDC debt ceiling, even with the circuit breaker. If it's just too much, then that's just the unfortunate reality of the situation. If we hit a price point where the amount to be liquidated would completely overwhelm the keepers, even with the circuit breaker, then there's basically only extreme measures are available. One is to surgically choose the Oracle prices one by one to only liquidate an amount that the keepers can handle piece by piece, which is has enormous social contract implications to doing such a thing. But from a technical standpoint is one idea. The second solution is to just take the loss, kind of like and trigger another flop auction like we're having tomorrow. This is also an idea, but the numbers that I'm thinking of are astronomical. I mean, certain price points, if ETH were to hit, in the 40s or maybe even the 50s, the losses for Maker could be projected to be higher than 20, 30 million. Who knows really how crazy things can get. It wouldn't just be single digits, almost certainly. And then lastly, emergency shutdown is an option. Emergency shutdown has not been historically very well understood. When should the community trigger it? When should they not? What does redeployment look like? Kind of like a cost-benefit analysis to doing emergency shutdown is not. We're not really at that stage yet in the community, but I think we need to get there rapidly, because this needs to be, in my mind, this needs to be a very credible option. If we were on the precipice of experiencing significant losses, the community needs to be confident in saying, we're going to trigger this to avoid a massive loss, as opposed to, I'm pretty sure some people are under the impression that emergency shutdown should only be triggered due to, say, technical failures or technical bugs or Oracle attacks or something else. So to be honest, I don't actually know if emergency shutdown is a viable option to prevent a set of liquidations from occurring, but that is something that needs to be figured out ASAP in my mind, or at least we should get some discussions going. One minor point is, could an emergency increase to the USDC debt ceiling help? So let's say we know a huge liquidation amount is going to come in. I think due to the GSM delay, this would not necessarily be an option, because it would take 4 hours to pass the change, and the auction lasts 6 hours. So you would really have to community would have to act extremely fast to increase the debt ceiling, and keepers would have to be on standby to generate DAI and then bid on the auctions. Again, technically it's possible, but I think it's fairly high coordination costs for something like that. So to the extent that one last point. So to the extent that we're relying on USDC liquidity, it would probably be wiser to try to predict what kind of debt ceiling we would like in some of the more emergency scenarios, and kind of have that increase in place preemptively.
I was just going to say, with the OSM, we'd have 7 hours rather than 6 hours. But
Right, 7 hours.
It's a relatively small difference. Yep.
Yep, 7 hours. So, yeah. Okay, so that's kind of more or less the space of the range of different scenarios. Want to talk a little bit about DAI liquidity and USDC collateral because it's fairly related. So why is there a DAI liquidity crunch? Primarily, DeFi DAI denominated positions in the ecosystem there's a lot of them. Borrowers want to deleverage and close out on all the platforms. Keepers need liquidity for flip auctions and potentially tomorrow's flop auctions. Some users want to hedge against the market decline and actually using DAI as a stable coin. Some short sellers may want DAI collateral for short positions, and maybe some speculators are trying to hoard DAI, trying to profit off of an increase in the DAI price. So some potential governance actions to consider, changing USDC parameters. I'll get to that in the next slide. And then I've seen some conversation on the fringes that if tomorrow the DAI liquidity situation is just horrendous, then there might be a fear about the success of the flop auctions and that those may be delayed. Probably should have been brought up in the previous conversation. Apologies, I forgot to bring that up, but certainly something that may want to be on the table. This kind of brings me to my last point, is about USDC as a collateral type. Everything I described in those scenarios earlier was only around auction keeper liquidity for the flip auctions. None of it was really anything to do with the DAI peg, even though we are in the midst of a DAI liquidity crunch. And we do have data that the 2 million or so DAI that's been generated from USDC has gone towards day-to-day peg management, selling on dexes, supplying to secondary markets, and so on. There's also been a lot of discussion about what the collateral pool might look like with a centralized asset. Certain people are of course, maybe a little bit dismayed at that prospect. So I think we need to be perfectly clear that there is an option to allow USDC in the collateral pool specifically for auctions and not for DAI peg arbitrage. And the simple solution there would be to just increase the stability fee to something astronomical, like 1,000%. So if the USDC stability fee was set that high, I just obviously made that number up, then you would not see the current 2 million of DAI being generated and the 2.5 million of USDC in the collateral pool. It would almost certainly be zero. And then if we hit some of those price drops that I was describing earlier, certainly a keeper would borrow at such a high stability fee to bid on a 6-hour auction and potentially make up to, just make astronomical returns on the auction, right? And this has the added benefit of there's no day-to-day exposure in the collateral pool, but keepers can, but we have that liquidity line open for keepers should they need it. So this discussion wasn't, we didn't really discuss this too much prior to the addition of USDC, but for people who, my opinion is that we should align on the target use case and figure this out. And one option is to add 2 separate USDC packages, one with the low stability fee and one with a high one, and they can have according debt ceilings, because I think even though the primary reason for adding USDC was for auctions, I think we've all enjoyed the short-term benefits of having it be used for peg management, right? The DAI price has dropped considerably. people are starting to feel hopeful again with the DAI price. I think it's trading almost $1 and $1.02. So there certainly are advantages to having it for day-to-day use. Of course, there's that centralization risk that people are so worried about. But yeah, the idea is that we should discuss.
Yeah. So, oh, can I interject here?
Sure.
Or do you want to carry on?
This is my last slide. So.
Okay. I just say
Um,
quickly, like, I think it makes more sense to have a separate package than to up the stability fee on the current one. It's like people that have open positions in the current one at 20% probably wouldn't be appreciative of it moving up to 1,000.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like from an operational standpoint, I think that makes total sense. All right, so network congestion issues are somewhat unrelated to DAI liquidity issues. Circuit breakers allow us to freeze liquidations for 1 cycle. USDC increases keeper liquidity capacity. And then we have 1 hour to receive a signal from the keepers and rally an executive vote. And that's definitely the conversation I'd like to explore more, is how does that actually work in practice? Trying to get a line on who the keepers are, creating some sort of form or some sort of ability for them to signal. And then lastly, very important that these solutions, they don't protect us from all market risks, and there are still some scenarios where there might have to be some more extreme measures.
Hey, Cyrus, I have a question.
Sure.
Regarding the circuit breakers, with the most recent liquidity crunch, it was the case that keepers were just being ground to a halt by gas fees and couldn't participate in auctions, not that they were just necessarily like kicked off. So in that scenario, would they have still been able to signal the liquidity or the new set of like liquidations and be able to get that circuit breaker initiated? And second, are there any situations where there are just like no circuits to alert that executive vote for the circuit breaker?
Yeah, so I guess if the 6-hour bid duration is still insufficient, then yeah, you could still circuit, or no, you couldn't, right? Because those auctions have already triggered, and keepers wouldn't really know until after the liquidations have occurred. Potentially as a preemptively, they could freeze any additional liquidations until the network issues are sorted out. Yeah, I mean, it can be used in that sense as well.
Okay, so I think the circuit breaker is like a pretty strong protective measure, but I'm just wondering if like, what are the options for that executive vote to essentially be signaled? Because I could see there just being something where like that signal from the keepers is kind of cut off, and like the executive vote would go to break the circuit, but there's kind of like, there's not the heads up. So I'd just be curious, and maybe we have to kind of go back to the people who like create this and see if there's like a second or third, but I'm very interested in that mechanism to which that signal is created and what happens if, right now they're not able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, go ahead, David, but yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know Chris Mooney mentioned it in yesterday's call, but one of the signals would be seeing auctions that start clearing at a higher and higher of a discount to the market price. So like the closer it is to the market price, that's a signal of good liquidity. But as auctions keep going and you see that drop, that's the kind of sign that we have.
Although the problem is that these all end around the same time. And so by the time you have that signal, they've all ended simultaneously and all liquidated for very little.
Right. Also, projected liquidations could also be another measure.
one of the assumptions is that we have we have an estimate for the starting base of keeper liquidity. And then, so you can know in advance which amounts keepers can handle and which they cannot. And in situations where we potentially don't get a signal from keepers, the community can still trigger the circuit breaker. I don't think auction keepers would ever complain necessarily about the circuit breaker being triggered, because if nothing else, it just gives them more time to source additional DAI. The risk is really to the protocol in terms of price volatility, where if the price of the asset keeps falling, by the time it's eventually liquidated, it might be significantly lower, and the community and governance would have waited for, and it wouldn't have been worth the trade-off to wait. So maybe one solution is we don't need a signal on the spot, but sometime in advance, we need to collectively come up with an estimate of that keeper liquidity, and then governance on its own can basically decide on the spot if they think the keepers can handle the incoming wave of liquidations or not.
And just to add to kind of David's idea about projected liquidity, we could see that coming with some type of velocity hours in advance. So it wouldn't have to be a trigger and then we act. We could kind of see like liquidity shrinking, and we'll know because of the the price of the collateral going down as well. So we can kind of prepare in advance of the signal created from other measures.
Makerman, you're furiously typing in the chat there. Did you have some points that you wanted to make on the mic for the record? Do you have access to a microphone?
All right, I'm going to give it a shot here.
Right,
Let me pull away from the family for a bit. My problem here is Cyrus laid out some nice scenarios, and three of them don't have resolution marks. You get to that point, what do, right? And so all those scenarios he laid out, we need exit strategies. What do we actually do? Because we don't want to get there and be going, well, what do? We want to know what we're going to do. And I've been saying this for a while, that we just really need to have a clear exit strategy on some of the stuff that we've already gone through beforehand, because you don't want to be in the thick of this and arguing about what the hell to do.
Do you mean like having prepared executive votes lined up and stuff like that for the scenarios that Cyrus outlined?
No, I'm just talking about the concept that we've already thought this through and we have an idea what we're going to do. The consensus on it, love to have that. The governance votes, everything in place, sure. All these things should kind of be coming to the fore. I'm just looking at what Cyrus did, and it's matching my own analysis to some extent. I see other issues, but it's like, what is the real plan? So you've got 4 scenarios, and 3 of them, certainly one of them looks really horrible. The other 2 really don't look great. And it's kind of like, when do you do what? Is I just keep coming back to that. Because I'm kind of seeing 2 options here. There's this, we don't really want to ES. There's this we don't want to ES this thing when everything's disjointed. So you're left with kind of stopping the auctions and the maker holders effectively riding collateral through what could be a really ugly event that could be really bad. And ES basically throws it on all the DAI holders virtually instantly. And if the markets are disjointed, it's going to be a horrific mess. It's just going to lay out everybody flat. Vault owners kind of be protected because they're at 100% liquidation ratio. If anybody's under that, then maker's underwater for that. And so I just keep coming back to, in these scenarios, who's getting hammered? Because I'm looking at Cyrus kind of has the first step on that, but we really need to go who gets hammered if an ES is done in each of those scenarios, to the tune of how much? And then, like, if that isn't the option, and Maker's going to ride collateral down on this, you know, to ride with your vault owners, go, look, we're with you here. We'll eat it if we have to. If this all goes to zero, we're all dead anyway. Whatever. Honestly, I mean, you're kind of looking at bad scenarios going, what do we really do? But you want to look at them from the case of, like, you know, if we do this, here's the implications for our entire ecosystem. Vault owners, DAI holders, Maker holders. Kind of a simple answer. And to do that in each of those scenarios that Cyrus kind of threw out, so that we can kind of at least get a look at, like, well, we really should do this because this is better for everybody. Or maybe we should do something beforehand to start it, which was, you know, to bring it back to a secondary topic. And I don't want to make this long, which is, you know, we had some discussion on what we should do with the SCD here. Long for Wisdom made a really great point that we really should think about just sort of getting that off our plate. And to do it while the market still looks okay, so that players have a chance to clear positions and settle in whether they're going to ride the Psi-F option down and ride it around, because I know there's a lot of people that were game on that. I've already cleared my positions on all of this. That I'm out of this watching all of it from USDC and whatever else. But that's just me, you know, and so other people need a chance. Vault holders can then get access to some of their F. You know, we need to kind of, if we're pulling back, let's pull back in ways that are consistent and sane and do it while the markets are still kind of good versus getting in the thick of this and then not having good ideas of what we do when we're in the thick of it. That's just kind of where I'm coming out on all of this. And I'm going to defer to the domains like Cyrus in particular, risk and governance management. You know, what do they say? You know, what are the implications for the losses? I can help do the analysis on it, or at least come up with an idea or comment. But I think we all need to be on the same page here so that we're kind of not pissing in the wind while it's happening. Like I saw happen when we were down $5 million, and I'm like, we're right here, guys. You know, if there's a decision to be made, decision was we ride through it, kinda, and then we ate some losses and weird stuff happened. Kind of don't want to get there again on like 20 or 30 million. Fortunately, these numbers are shrinking rapidly, and so that's my.
Right. Well, I think that's the point. Is valid, right? We need to have contingency plans as well, or contingencies for our contingencies. So we put solutions in place, but we have to anticipate what happens if those solutions don't work.
I have some ideas to try to make this as simple as possible, because I do agree that there's a lot of coordination costs here. But if you click on this link in the sidebar, which links to Vishesh's data page, and you can see in the purple chart the amount of collateral to be liquidated at every price point. And then just if all the community can get, or just even estimate, is the keeper DAI liquidity, then they can know in advance at what price points they would trigger a circuit breaker and at what price points are so untenable that it would require some of those more extreme measures. It's at least, it's maybe not like a perfect solution, but it's definitely a jumping off point. So for example, hovering over like a price of 60, for example, at 60, the keepers would need 20 million DAI. Well, you know, maybe we don't think they have quite 20, but maybe they have more than 10. And there's obviously like the USDC edition. So that seems like logically speaking, could be a good example to use a circuit breaker, because it feels like if they had one extra cycle to get their DAI back, that would be good. But if you're starting to talk about prices of, you know, 55 and below, we're talking 50+ million DAI, then we're going to have to come up with some other ideas for stuff like that. But at the very least, I think the community can come up with some good short-term heuristics.
So just one point there mathematically. If you need, say, 30 million DAI to cover, a large quantity of liquidations, if you do have that USDC collateral type available to use, theoretically, then if there's a problem with auction efficiency in terms of DAI price, right? So if DAI price is running up, making it hard for keepers to source DAI at an attractive price, you can use basically a 1.25 division on, or a 1.25 multiplier on the amount of capital that you need for the liquidations to determine the amount of USDC you would need, and then maybe like make it 1.26 or 1.27 so that you have some collateral buffer in there. I mean, if you actually use the same site and you click over to USDC, you can see about how much leverage people are currently taking using the USDC option that's available. And as of yesterday, a huge chunk of it was, between 120 and 130% collateralized. And now there's a bigger chunk that's like 130 to 140. But theoretically, when this thing is being heavily utilized, people are probably going to ride the line of the collateral cutoff for USDC. So you can effectively call it like a 126, 127% multiplier in the amount of capital you need. And then you don't even need DAI. You just need that much, US dollars or USDC.
Thanks, Vishesh. You killed the entire meeting. Just kidding. That's great context. Appreciate it. Cyrus, what do you think about time? We still have the SCD discussion ahead of us,
Yeah.
And we also have a syndicate presentation.
Yeah. Well, we can bump this in. No, I'm just joking. We can, yeah. This is going to be an ongoing conversation for sure. This is not a one and done by any stretch. So let's kick off the SCD discussion and then jump into the syndicate presentation.
Aaron, I tried to put you on the spot. I don't know if that worked or not. Do you want to walk us through this thread, or should we do it?
Well, I wrote a little preamble of kind of how we got to where we are today, and then we can kind of discuss kind of further steps from there.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Cool. As we all know, MCD began on November 18th. On December 19th, a month after MCD was opened, and ample migration had already occurred, I began a series of signal threads on SCD Shutdown. I started by trying to determine what the consensus was on specific shutdown parameters. These included what the peg threshold should be, what time frame we would wait, and what size supply threshold we would need to hit in order to trigger a shutdown. We determined through rough consensus during this time period that 5 cents off peg, 6 months, and when supply reached 10 million would be the parameters required to trigger SCD shutdown. By January 16th, we had finalized this consensus thread. Around this time, Derek from the foundation began aggregating discussion on Rocket Chat and the forums with some higher level details, such as a tax function implementation. Some discussion began on the merits and logistics of such an implementation. A week later, I created a new thread with the intention of polling on the implementation of the tax parameter. During this period, we had a lot of good debate about the pros and cons of such a strategy, as well as the presentation of a few other shutdown proposals. During that time, I tried to summarize the varying options that were discussed, and depending on where this call goes, we can also discuss those different options. Soon after discussions began, it soon became clear that signaling a certain direction could have serious economic and systemic consequences. It was determined that if we were signaling that we would not be going with a tax and instead were planning to forgive outstanding SCD stability fees, knowing parties could use that to their advantage and mint SAI up to the debt ceiling interest-free. At the time, the debt ceiling was considerably higher than the current supply, so it could have had adverse effects on the peg stability. Not to mention, this interest-free SAI could migrate over to DAI and still pay no interest for as long as SCD was open. Therefore, action kind of stalled until we could get a better handle on the SCD debt and migration contract ceilings. Unfortunately, we were never able to pass reductions to these parameters, presumably due to events like Denver and other instances of voter apathy during this time period. Not until recently, with the current market conditions, could we get Maker voters to start participating again. That leads us to our current circumstances. Obviously, we know what has been going on with MCD the past week and the extreme liquidity crunch we're facing. Overlooked in this chaos, unfortunately, has been the SCD system. Brought to light in yesterday's call, Primo presented on the state of migration in SCD. In the call, he showed that SCD liquidations were not happening, probably due to a lack of size liquidity, which was creating extreme price inconsistency, making it unprofitable to bite CDPs below liquidation ratio. If current market conditions continue to worsen, it can be surmised that SCD liquidations will continue to fail at an even greater rate, putting PETH holders at risk of eating these costs and ultimately forcing us to initiate global settlement at an inopportune time. Therefore, it is imperative that we begin discussion on SCD shutdown once again. So where do we go from here? Any thoughts? I know earlier today we were having a good discussion in Rocket Chat, and I know MakerMan did a summary of that on the forum thread that I posted yesterday.
I mean, it is worth noting that sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it is worth noting that as of this morning, almost all liquidations have occurred on SCD. I mean, it was in the thousands. Now it's in the like maybe 150 or so. ETH is under collateralized.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yep.
I think that, yeah, this is a tough one, right? So this is like the big discussion that nobody really wants to have. So I think that it's important to clarify precisely what the risks that SCD presents to the MCD ecosystem at this point. And I don't think I have a clear perspective. And Aaron, have you had a chance to sort of wrap your head around the specific sort of a bullet point item? So like, this is why SCD is bad for MCD right now.
To be honest, I'm not knowledgeable enough on the technical level to have those kind of ideas. So I think Cyrus or Long for Wisdom or MakerMan probably have a better idea of what's going on there.
Yeah, I'd dearly love to hear from the ecosystem. So we have lots and lots of smart people on this call. And I know it can be a bit daunting to grab your microphone and just start talking, but please don't feel shy about that. So if you have thoughts about SCD, if you have insight into the risks associated with maintaining this additional system, I would dearly love to start hearing some of those ideas.
Cyrus, do you have any opinion on this? I kind of want to hear from you before I kind of launch off on this first.
Oh, my only opinion is that the community treats this with some level of urgency and determination, because there's kind of a weird situation where the PETH holders are at risk, right? If ETH goes down and these underwater CDPs do not get bitten because of the SI price trading above $1.03, then PETH holders are at risk. I just think it's something that needs to be verbalized and discussed, and the community just should march towards a course of action rather than ignoring it. But in terms of say, like the tax situation, I don't have a strong opinion there. In terms of the date, or I don't have a strong opinion. My concern is that if the community does nothing, then there could be a bout of market volatility that would almost necessitate an emergency shutdown, like on the spot. And I think that would be the least desirable outcome. So I'm just trying to get some discussion going.
So
okay. I pretty much agree with you on that. Long, go ahead. I'm gonna mute.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was kind of making this point in the chat earlier, in that in the event that we see another like major market movement downwards, like we're almost going to have to call shutdown on SCD, and it's going to be really bad for SI holders, and I guess vol holders as well, due to the PEF mechanic. So given that in that situation, we would almost certainly have to call shutdown. Do we want to just call it now, such that when we shut down like elegantly and everyone gets like what they're owed, right? Like just as much as possible, right? Like with the liquidations like almost cleared from what I'm not sure what someone said. We're at a point where if we shut it down now, then SI holders get $1 worth of ETH, vault holders get their debt back in ETH, and like everyone maybe doesn't walk away happy, but they walk away with like the money that they owed, I guess. Whereas that would not be true if we had to shut down like in the middle of like if a whole bunch of liquidations happened and they weren't clearing and we had to shut down, then that wouldn't be the case, I think.
Yeah, I gotcha. Let me try and run with this for a little bit. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Can you guys hear me? You mind if I chime in real quick?
I can hear you.
Go for it.
Well, I was wondering if this shutdown could wait until after the flop auctions, or is it urgent enough that we have to do it before?
I don't think that anybody gave like a super strong urgency, except for that, you know, Cyrus is recommending, you know, like should happen, we should be actionable, but I doubt it's going to happen within the next day. But I'm just speculating.
Do you have a lot of money locked in to SCD right now? Just trying to understand your motivations.
Me, I have no money locked in SCD.
What's your thinking behind that then?
Well, depending on which option we choose, the MKR price would probably take a pretty big hit, considering like if we get none of the fees back, that's kind of missed MKR burn, and the MKR price really doesn't have much lower to go before the flop auctions would be in trouble.
All right, guys, let me run with this for a little bit.
So I want to bring one thing up.
If
you look at the liquidations on single collateral DAI, everything basically happens right at that $70 price point. Like that's basically where SCD would probably have a major issue, is at the $70 ETH price point. I can post a link here, but it really just needs, if we're worried about auction failure, it needs to happen before that huge drop. I mean, it's basically more than half happens at between 69 and 70. I mean, actually, after it falls below, if it falls below $69, global settlement has basically happened. There's like 2 million SCD left.
Yeah, I think kind of we're all sitting and looking at this going, yeah. My take on this is that the fees in the system, let's waive them. Good PR move, be done with it. Path holders end up wherever they end up. Given the state of the market, it's really almost an irrelevancy of like who pays what here. We got ourselves under 15 million. I'm actually really happy with that. We have one CDP holder with 8+ million in that, 7 million left. We're kind of at the point that the only issue is kind of the PR optics on how much time we give for the final closeout. And literally, it's going to take governance some time to move on it. But I'm thinking 7 days, max. And whether this happens before the auction, I'm thinking, no, probably not a good idea. But it definitely should be within 7 days, max. And the warning's been given. Everybody's been warned about how this baby is going to go and what's going to happen. Anybody caught in the trap of this, woe be unto you. I mean, literally. And for Maker, it's time to get this one off the plate. I mean, in another situation where markets were good, I'd say, give them time. Given the market situation, the fact that we could, all these people could be caught in a really bad trap should the prices drop, we got to unload this one kind of sooner rather than later. And the only thing that I see on this as bad is it's going to free up all the F, and then all the SI holders are basically going to get F, but the vast majority of those, if they were on the ball here, they want that. And they want it at a low F price because Psi becomes an option on F that they can exercise at any time. What they can do with their Psi in the interim, a whole different ball game. So I don't know the implications of PETH holders. I don't really understand the bridge contract in terms of how this shuts down, but everything that I look at says big yes to kind of shutting it down, waive fees, be done with it. The idea that we're going to get any more maker burn or any more money out of this to satisfy a deficit, I think is unlikely because it's going to go to PETH holders anyway. So when it comes to maker burn or increasing the surplus out of shutting down the SCD, for maker holders, it's a wash. And the PR optics would be good if they just said, we're going to relieve fees. I know it burns all the people who did early, which is something I didn't like. But based on how the system works, I just don't see how you can make this become anything good and put money in the pockets of the surplus. I'm missing it here. And I'm completely in agreement with Cyrus on this and other people who voiced the concern that if we go to 70, the system jams and it literally lands on all Psi holders. But in the loosest sense we ask it now, it lands on the Psi holders anyway. And so, really I'm kind of like, let's give them a shot to get their stuff out of there before. And all the vault owners that have F, their LR is going to go to 100%. So it might free up some F to come into the MCD system. I consider it unlikely given the PR on the zero bid auction stuff. But who knows, it might generate some DAI that we can use for liquidity. So I don't see too much of a downside here. We just need to give enough PR notice on this that the 7-day clock is ticking from either the time of the governance action or literally today. I want to see this thing closed out by Friday next week, end of story, and be done with it for 15 different reasons. And my other issue, which I noted in the thread, is I don't want to shut this thing down and have people have user interface issues to either access their vaults or to redeem Psi for the collateral. That stuff needs to be tested and clean and working before this flies. And so I'm a big advocate, let's get it done now before the market collapses on us again, and make sure all our ducks are in an order on the effects on the bridge, the PETH holders, just to make sure somebody understands it, because I don't understand it in detail, unfortunately. Get the PR warmed up on it and just get it into a governance ready to go and move on that and be done with it. So that's where I'm at on this.
Yeah. So I mentioned this in the sidebar, but could one or more of the devs potentially discuss how, like, the impact of the bridge, I guess, to MCD in SCD and with the shutdown and or with SCD going underwater? Like, what are the considerations we need to take into account around the migration bridge?
I think that Chris is looking up something in the code right now.
Yeah,
Chris,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm as ready as I can be. I'm not an expert on single collateral DAI by any means. So if I say anything wrong, and if any of the other devs are listening, like, let me know. So that function that I just linked is what happens when we cage single collateral DAI. So there's a nice little cache function right above it. That's how people can kind of get their.
Can you decipher for us though? Or what do you mean cage?
So yeah, so if we emergency shut down the system, basically that's what in the code we call caging. And so the ability to redeem one's Psi for collateral is sitting in that cache function. And there's also another really bothersome function in the code that only works after emergency shutdown, that also allows one to mint some amount of Psi for collateral. And I believe this is at the price at shutdown. So maybe one of the other devs can confirm that. Yeah,
you're correct.
So this would allow someone, I mean, there's I don't even, is there even like a debt ceiling limit check in here? I'm not sure there is. So I think this would just allow someone to always sort of mint at that price, and they could then, you know, try and push that across the bridge into MCD. So that's the sort of argument I was making in the sidebar, that we must shut down the bridge before we cage single collateral DAI. I don't know if any of the other engineers want to add any more color to that at all. But
Well, what we could also say is, yeah, for sure we want to shut down the bridge, but we would also want to remove the funds that, I mean, the side we have now in MCD as well, because that collateral will need to be auctioned if we do not get basically empty before. Otherwise, it will start being a fixed claim on Ether, and yeah, it might stop basically backing the hold I created. So yeah, I think we should immediately basically stop the bridge from side to DAI, keep the other bridge from DAI to side, so we can keep draining the funds that now the migration contract has. Yeah, and then we can shut down, but if we still have side funds in the migration contract, we will need to liquidate them.
this is off the top of my head, but would that process, would that end up looking like, I don't know, we go into the USDC adapter, create a bunch of DAI, push the DAI across the bridge once we've shut down one direction of it, so that we get a bunch of Psi collateral, and then hold the collateral, so the bridge is basically drained, and shut down the other side of the bridge, and then emergency shut down the system, use the cache function to claim our underlying collateral for the Psi that we've pushed through, trade that on the market, and then release the funds out of the USDC adapter by paying back that position. Do you think that's probably like the sort of right circuit to get all that done?
Yeah, I mean, if we do not get CDP holders that use this DAI for closing their single collateral DAI positions, yeah, we will need to do something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that doesn't have to be us. That can be anybody that wants to take advantage of that. I don't know if there's going to be an ARB opportunity there or not, but that'll be the thing we have to consider.
All right, so we need to get the Psi out of the migration contract, or the DAI side, the MCD side of the migration contract. So that needs to happen before shutdown, essentially.
I don't know if we can shut off one direction of the migration contract. I think it's both ways. We might have to actually build a spell. Or
No, we can shut down the adapter. Yeah.
Okay.
Kurt, if you were talking, your mic is muted. I saw your box light up.
I unmuted very briefly, but I was just saying what Gonzalo was saying.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, again, I know you guys are all super busy, but it would be nice, I guess it would be good if we could get like an overview of what has to happen for us to shut it down safely without affecting MCD. Like, can one of you guys write up like the stages of things that have to happen and like what potential problems they might cause or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we can put something together. I mean, maybe even like make the spells and then talk about what happens after we execute a spell. You know, what the community can do to sort of unwind that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. We need to coordinate the mechanical steps and then figure out where governance can be inserted into that process.
I definitely say like we should try and get like a plain English explanation as well as the spells though, if possible.
Yeah, God, yes. How this works really would be important. It didn't really hit me to sign the migration contract is going to have claims on F, which then will have to be auctioned. That's a big number.
Yeah, and that further impacts DAI liquidity, right? Because we need to DAI to close those. That's
Absolutely. Yeah. So we need to see these.
Sorry, go ahead, Maker. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say absolutely. Yeah, it has implications on DAI and how we liquidate this out. So yeah, it's all we're seeing these steps laid out. Really important.
Okay, we're running out of time again, so that we're past the hour-and-a-half mark here. So I'm going to repeat myself for like maybe the 100th time. so things need to happen, and for decisions to become sticky, they need to move out of the audio medium and into the written one. And so I think that we have some more steps here. I think that the actionable step is that, as Loan for Wisdom pointed out, we all need to have the same mental model of what actually mechanically needs to happen in this process. Then we need to look at that from a business and risk perspective to figure out what the implications are. And then we need to look at it, wrap governance around that, or alter the process to adhere to the governance process. And then we need to start thinking about timing. And all of those things need to happen in the forum. So let's look for a forum thread, I think. Possibly jumping onto Aaron's thread, maybe a new one, but let's get that kicked off in earnest again. Actually, again, let's audit the previous SCD shutdown threads, make sure that we take the learning that we accumulated there, and let's get a new initiative going so we can think about this. Cyrus, did you have any other major topics that you wanted to get through today, or can we talk to the syndicate for a bit?
I'm done for my agenda.
All right, I keep on calling it the syndicate, which sounds ominous. Maybe one of the first things you guys can talk about in your presentation is how you want to be referred to. We can start with that. The backstop syndicate, there we go.
I don't know, I think syndicate sounds kind of epic. I like it.
All right, let's stick with that.
Yeah, so this is going to be very short. There isn't a working demo to walk through yet. The UI and the backend contracts aren't quite linked up yet. The estimate that those get synchronized is by the end of the day. But the UI is going to look something a bit like this, giving people the ability to, to deposit DAI, exchange DAI if they need to, and withdraw at any point prior to the auctions start. Once a first bid has been placed, there can be no more, just because we need to be able to fairly distribute the either successful or failed auctions to those who actually participated, and prevent late entrants from getting the MKR rewards. Here's the GitHub repository that talks a little bit about about what's going on, what the purpose of it is. And the Backstop Syndicate has a encoded price in it. Currently it's $100, but new syndicates can easily be deployed by anybody who wants to, if they want to enter at a different price point. That's going to be the official one. I'll just give you just a quick look at the Solidity code, but it's not a terribly complex system. It's just one that mints tokens for those that give their DAI, and the DAI can really only be used for a single thing, and that is to participate in auctions. And once everything is completed, they can get a proportional amount of their total supply back in both DAI and MKR if they won any of these auctions. We're playing around with, it's got a couple deployments. These are not going to be the final deployments. There are some changes, but we're just working through the deployment process, making sure that these things are going to actually function in the real world. Well, that was the link from before. Yeah, and that's really it. So the fact that it's at 100, 100 DAI per maker is important, because that gives us quite a bit of time based on the current parameters. Since the auction started at 200 and go down, I think it's 20%, that should give us 4 ticks worth of time, and each tick is, I believe, 3 days. So it's possible that this DAI backstop syndicate will be useless, by tomorrow morning if all of those auction lots are already taken at that price point. The only time that this thing becomes important is in, it's probably going to be about a week, when the auctions that are at the price point that this is hard coded with go live.
Yeah, I have a series of questions actually. So that hard coded price point, is that subject to change? Is there some flexibility in the system so you guys can change that?
Yeah, so each price point is going to be a different, 100 is just the one we picked here, is going to be a parameter, so it's encoded into like the token name. Yeah, it's very, very easy to change. I think the idea was there's going to be many of these contracts, but that's really the governance. The governance is, there's a new contract, you can choose to participate in it. We didn't want to get into governance of like an existing contract and people picking different prices. You pool resources at various price points, by interacting with a variety of these, and we just picked a 100 number because it was easy, and it's really designed to be a backstop, right? It's not trying to say like I'm going to try to bid 195 because it's super close. It's just like we don't want to see it go any lower than this. But yeah, we plan on probably having a 100 and a 150.
Okay. Are you guys collecting a premium off the system? Is there any fees involved?
No. It's just a contract that just splits things up.
Cool. Third one is that I'll express my personal appreciation for all the work and effort you guys put into this, and so this is incredible. It's absolutely heartwarming to see the community come together like this. And I want to extend an offer. So let's talk privately. I have resources available, and we can potentially get this thing audited. If not, probably not today, but soon. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yep. Yeah, it's been very rapid development, and Dharma is already talking about, they've mentioned that they plan on putting 1 million DAI into it, like at launch. So I think that, it definitely warrants a pretty significant level of scrutiny.
Cool. Yeah, we can try and rally the troops. I think that the audit might be possible. Does anybody else have any questions for the syndicate?
I was just going to say, from a personal note, I'd be very nervous using it without an audit. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you have a projection? Obviously, everything is crazy right now. Do you have a projection of when you feel that this will be ready to hit mainnet, or if it's not already there?
I mean, it is already there, but that's just like a test of the deployment process. It's not a this isn't where it's planned on living. So I mean, it's on mainnet, but this isn't the right one. I would say in the next probably several. I would hope by the end of the week, because it really is going to be an issue of marketing and soliciting DAI in order to participate. I mean, a million's a nice start, but it would be nice if it was quite a bit higher than that. But again, this also might be, as of tomorrow at noon, we just stop working on this, right? I mean, if all those lots are bid on, this is a worthless project. This is only worthwhile if it ever hits, whatever marker that we feel it needs to not slide behind.
This type of safety net, though, is is amazing. So it helps people sleep at night. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be driving people.
Can I ask one question? Oh,
yes.
I just wanted to ask one question. So let's say this is utilized. What happens if it gets like 50% use? How do people get like half the maker they pledged for, like everybody, or?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out what happens if it's mixed.
Yes. So really the way that it works is you can deposit as much DAI as you want before everything starts, and then everything goes through, the auctions happen, bids can only take place at a certain price, and then at the end, you can always claim out a proportional amount of whatever is on the contract.
So it would look like a Uniswap contract, basically, right? At the time you withdraw, you kind of get the DAI and the maker.
I mean, the price doesn't change.
I'm saying though, but in the loosest sense, in terms of the ratios of what you get at the time, like you could exit the contract with your tokens, just like you can exit a Uniswap contract for the amount of maker and the amount of DAI that's sitting there.
Yes.
Is that the way?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
As a liquidity provider, yeah, it's very, very similar to being a Uniswap liquidity provider. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. That was my.
Yep. In fact, that's 100% what it is. The only thing that's a little bit unusual about it is that we actually need to look up how much of the DAI is in auctions, because we'll actually let you withdraw DAI if there's liquidity while they're stored inside of auctions, but you still get something proportional, and you're going to miss out on whatever MKR comes later out of that auction.
That was going to be my next question. Is it possible this thing could end up with negative DAI liquidity, meaning people pull and then there's auctions? Okay, that's okay.
Yes, yep. And so we will, if there's enough liquidity, we'll give it back to you, and you're going to miss out on your MKR. And if there isn't, well, you got to wait. But we do fit into the calculation for people who want to exit, because you can exit whenever you can if it's possible, and we'll try to give you the proper amount.
One thing I was going to maybe say is, you sort of mentioned this might become useless after tomorrow. I believe there will still be more fluff auctions, because like they don't all there is like a large wave that trigger immediately based on the liquidations, but I believe there's also some trailing ones. Maybe one of the devs can like sort of say more authoritatively on that, but I think there's some more like after like spreading out into the future. So.
Well, I think he means after this wave of flop auctions. But I was going to counter that and say there's certainly going to be flop auctions for Maker in the future because there are many years to come. And I think it would be cool to have something like this on standby for any potential future flop auctions. And then potentially we can hopefully reach a point where the turnaround between the debt and the auction is even tighter and tighter. Because I know there was some fair amount of pushback on this 7-day lag. So, you know, with tools and infrastructure like this, I think it can only help make the system more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you could use it on, flap and flip, but I feel like those are a little bit, well, I mean, flip anyway, it's probably a little bit more competitive. I don't think like a simple contract like this is going to, compete with the bot ecosystem.
I wouldn't say that. I think there's. I
guess maybe it's a backstop. Chance. Yeah, there could be. I mean, a backstop like this could have been handy in the, on Thursday.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so long as incentives are aligned enough to actually trigger the contract properly and monitor it.
I feel like you probably end up with liquidity coming out of the contract unless like liquidations were expected, or like, sorry, auctions were expected, which is maybe fine, but it'd be good if it like exists there still, so people can like, in the case of auctions, people can like jump into that rather than having to set up a keeper or run a keeper. Yeah, I mean, ideally, like, I make this like transparently put things into the DSR so people are just okay like leaving their DAI there for like, long periods of time, and that's just where they put that instead of the DSR. Good point. That's
That's interesting. Yeah, great presentation. Thanks.
Great.
All right, Cyrus, I'm going to hand it back to you again, just to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and all the points that we wanted to make have been made. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling okay. I mean, I think we achieved a tremendous amount of discussion today. Actually, I'm not sure what we're going to talk about tomorrow, to be honest. But yeah, I think the last 3 days have been definitely very full of good discussion.
Can I maybe tie up something maybe? So there's polls currently in the flop dead auction parameter adjustment thread. What are we thinking about Thailand on closing those? Like, at what point do we need to make a decision about changing those? But at the moment, it doesn't look like people want to make changes. Do we want to leave it up for like another hour or something, or do we want to just close them now and think like on the grounds that everyone's made the decision?
Well, in an hour, under the assumption that additional information was provided in this call and people might want to act on it. Is that what you mean, or?
Yeah, I mean, maybe people want to act on it, like due to the discussions in this call, but potentially if we're saying that, then maybe we should wait till it's like uploaded or something. So it's like, I don't know. Like,
well, it's kind of a Heisenberg thing. Now that you said it, we probably should do it, right? So
maybe, I don't know.
No, I don't want anybody to act on the new information. Shut it down right now. Okay, so it's going to take 3 or 4 hours for this to get processed and then uploaded and all the rest of it. So waiting for the call to be available is going to be tough. But yeah, I think that but we do need to think about timing on these things. Like we need to have a start and a stop on these polls. Probably clarified at the outset whenever possible. Obviously things are pretty chaotic right now.
Potentially.
But, can you, I think an hour sounds fine to me. Does anybody else have any suggestions?
I can post on the thread and say these are closing in an hour, right? Which gives people some warning. But yeah.
Okay.
I think an hour works.
All right.
All right. Then I'm going to do my post ambles, I guess. We had 3 major topics we've discussed today. We have flop auctions, we have SCD shutdown, and we have, oh my gosh, did I just forget the other major topic? Can somebody help me out?
Auction liquidations.
Yeah, and so those all have forum threads associated with them. They need to have some additional clarity presented. There needs to be discussion. We've had some very compelling ideas raised in this call. So if you asked a question, made a comment, or didn't get a chance to ask your question, please join the forums, hit those threads, make your voice heard. We have a skin in the game ecosystem, but the ecosystem and those holders follow our lead, the lead of the people in this community and in these calls and in that forum. So please make sure that you bring your domain expertise to bear and help us ensure the safety of the system. All right. Super happy with the turnout here. So thanks everybody again for joining. It's a big ask and it doesn't go unnoticed. We really appreciate it.
Cheers,
I'm gonna
guys.
stop the recording now.
Thanks all.
Yeah, summary.